Hello and welcome to the ACICS AWARE webinar from 2 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. The ACICS AWARE webinar stands for ACICS Webinar Announcing, Relating, and Explaining, in this case, the April 2016 Memorandum to the Field. So we will go through the memo to the field that was sent on Monday of this week. Today's presenters will include Anthony Bita, the executive in charge, Ms. Perlita Walters-Gilliam, Associate Vice President, Quality Enhancement and Training, and myself, Ian Harisduck, Senior Manager, Policy and Compliance. So the agenda for today's webinar will include a welcome from our executive in charge, Anthony Bita. We will also go over quickly the 2016 ACICS Professional Development Conference and give a quick plug for that conference coming soon. The real meat of the presentation will be Topic 1, Proposed Changes to the Accreditation Criteria, which can be seen in the memo to the field, as well as Topic 2, Informational, for information-only section, also included within the memo. And then, of course, as always, we like to hear questions and comments from the field following this webinar. So please, if you have them, wait until the end and then submit your question, and we will answer that question as they come. So just quickly, the annual meeting, as you all know, is happening in a couple weeks, May 11th through 13th in Fort Worth, Texas. Online registration is still available. So please, if you're not already signed up, go ahead and sign up. And if you are, then we'll see you in a couple weeks in Texas. We have a lot of different sessions and conferences. So we think it'll be worth your while to go out to Fort Worth and take a listen to what presentations there are for ACICS. And just so you can follow along with the memo to the field, if you haven't already downloaded it, go to www.acics.org, and under Council Actions, you'll see the Memorandum to the Field link, and then, of course, this will be the April 2016 memo to the field, so you'll click on that link, and you'll get the Memorandum to the Field that we are discussing today. And with that said, I will throw it over to Anthony Bita, Executive in Charge.
Thank you, Ian. This is Tony Bita. Good to be with all of you today and be able to go over some information that I think you'll find particularly valuable and helpful as you make your plans and to improve your operations and serve students better. It goes without saying that the Council very recently has made some very substantial changes and signaled very clearly to all of the ACICS accredited colleges and schools that we have turned a corner. And that corner is represented not only by changes in leadership, but also in a couple of key themes that I think you will find reflected throughout the slides you're about to encounter. That includes reemphasize the focus on putting students first, that the #1 reason we exist is to protect and preserve the interests of students currently enrolled in our colleges and schools. And our quality assurance program has to provide value in their context, otherwise it needs to be changed. Secondly, transparency and accountability. We hold our schools to that. And we know that our sources of scrutiny and oversight hold our program of accreditation to standards of transparency and accountability. We plan to demonstrate at every opportunity, natural and fabricated, that we can meet those requirements for transparency and accountability. And then finally, the theme is restoring trust and confidence. Many of these issues have been around for a while, and I believe any of the remedies or changes that you hear discussed today will not necessarily totally remedy those issues, but they go a long way to making substantial strides, and they reflect the emphasis and the focus of this council and this board of directors on how this program of quality assurance needs to evolve to be effective and to serve the interests of students. So with that, I would like to turn it back to Ian and just remind everybody that regardless of your degree of participation today and whether or not the Q&A session at the end is fulfilling, you can feel free to call me or email me at any time if you have a need for follow-up conversations. I will make myself available. Ian?
So, thank you, Tony. We will go into topic number 1, which are the proposed criteria revisions and enhancements to the accreditation criteria. Those can be found in the first section of the memorandum to the field. And please note, these were criteria revisions and discussions that had been going on through since even last year, and happened further discussions in February, and have essentially been proposed in April. So there's been much discussion by the council and staff and the field about these, and now the opportunity is for the field to certainly hear these proposed revisions and, of course, ask questions or make comments about these. So I will go over the 8 proposed enhancements to the criteria. We'll begin with a discussion about the definition of academic quality, move then into a data integrity standard, then discuss some enhancements with the probation standards, as well as enhancements with our recruitment activities review. Then we will move into an institutional performance disclosures and discussion about those enhancements. Then into our new placement definition in the glossary of the accreditation criteria. Then we will move to a proposed criteria revision for the debarment policy. And finally, for the proposed criteria revisions, we will end with the admission requirements for professional master's degree programs. And with that, we will go into our first topic, which is the definition of academic quality, and I will throw it back to Tony to lead this discussion off.
Thank you, Ian. So, proposed revisions to Title I, Chapter 1 of the ACICS criteria would establish a new comprehensive definition of academic quality. The implied and expressed definition of academic quality by ACICS has been contained in a variety of different documents and a variety of different sources over the years. Given the changes that we're going through and the focus on definition and clarity, the Council felt it appropriate to put those all in one place and create a comprehensive, almost a prelude statement about how academic quality is defined in the context of the ACICS program of accreditation. Its elements include academic quality as in the context of the institution's mission. Always that's primary, because the mission of the institution's ACICS accredits are unique and different from the missions of most of the other parts of higher education community, and that's to be recognized and honored and reinforced. Secondly, its academic quality is measured by the extent to which the institution achieves student learning and student success outcomes. It's really important that alone, I believe, among the accreditors, ACICS links academic quality to student learning and student success outcomes. It's not an implied linkage, it's expressed. Third, effectiveness of the institution demonstrated by compliance with standards and continuous quality enhancement. And then lastly, the proposal also moves the ACICS statement of mission under Title I and Chapter 1. I'd also like to talk a little bit about the new data integrity standard. As you know, we have existing within the criteria numerous references to the expectation that our institutions operate and serve students with integrity. standalone, however, was lacking a standard that specifically references data, and more importantly, gives some key elements of why that's an important consideration now and going forward, particularly as the ACICS program of accreditation becomes more reliant on data, quantitative data, qualitative data, other sources of data, and in most cases those data are derived and self-reported. In that context, the key components of this standard are that the standard provides explicit requirements for truthfulness, reliability, and accuracy of data collected and submitted to ACICS. And that it should be clear from this standard that the Council has discretion to independently review performance data at any time for any reason and require that it be verified, that it be subject to verification and that it pass some threshold of verifiability. Third, a reminder, and you will hear more about this later, that this expectation is being applied in real time this cycle, and the Council has directed that there will be an additional evaluator added to each site visit team with the primary role of verifying reported institutional data. With that, I will turn it to Ian, and he can talk to you about the next topic.
Thank you, Tony. We will move now into probation standards and the proposed enhancements to that standard. The first change to note is that probation now will specifically be determined, of course, by Council and may be ordered when an institution has demonstrated that it cannot consistently operate in compliance with the accreditation criteria. What this does is allow better access for the Council to issue a probation action when it determines that the institution is not consistently operating in compliance, and it can be done when it finds that information on visits or student achievement outcomes or adverse information comes in. So there are certainly a number of different opportunities when a probation action might be utilized and might occur if a institution can't consistently operate in compliance with our standards. With that said, it's also will be included into the newly designed Council action process as another out-of-compliance action with compliance warning and show cause directive already as out-of-compliance actions. Probation has been a standard that ACICS has used, but will now be another opportunity if the institution hasn't provided that it can remain in compliance. And finally, with the change, there will be a definitive time frame for when the probation will either result in a withdrawal action or be lifted. It was a little too open-ended in the criteria prior to this change, so the Council wants to make it definitively clear when that action will be disposed of, either through the withdrawal action as a final negative action or obviously be lifted and the institution be back in compliance. It is of note that with the probation, it will remain the requirement that if an institution is placed on probation, the Council will notify the U.S. Secretary of Education and will require the institution to notify the public and prospective students about this action taken against the institution. That will do it for probation standards, and I'll move on and take recruitment activities review as well and discuss this enhancement to the criteria, which is we've always obviously had the requirement that admissions and recruiting personnel communicate current and accurate information. That has always been a standard and been a standard within the criteria that's reviewed and looked at by ACICS. The change and enhancement to this standard will now require institutions to document their process for doing this oversight of recruitment and admissions personnel, so that the Council and review teams that go on site can be confident that the institution has a process for documenting admission and recruitment oversight, and maintaining that documentation and reviewing that, which could of course come with trainings that are already occurring for admission and recruitment personnel, and meetings and other opportunities that institutions have to ensure that they're making sure that current and accurate information is being provided. Finally, with this standard, the Council and ACICS is looking to conduct additional research, and we may be reaching out to you member institutions to ask you to complete a survey or give some best practices on what you do for overseeing admission and recruitment practices, and then we plan to keep all that information, compile it, and then send out a best practice guide for those practices. And with that, I will turn it over to Per-Leader Walters-Gilliam, who will discuss institutional performance disclosures.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today to discuss these very significant but critical changes and enhancements to our standards and procedures. Many of you may be familiar with Section 3-1-704, which is a fairly new standard. At the time of initial publication, the expectation was that institutions would publish this information. However, during the on-site evaluation process, as many of you may be aware since you've been through a visit or had hosted a team, the application and the expectation has been at the campus level for consistency and clarity in application and enhancements so that the membership can be fully aware of ACIC's expectations. We have made the change to the standard that each campus must disclose this information, so not institutions anymore, especially in the instances where you have a multi-campus institution. The expectation, as now articulated in the standard, will be at the campus level to disclose performance information. The standard also includes in the enhancement that licensure, retention, and placement must be included at a minimum, those three things. And I'm pretty sure that all of you are aware that this has been our expectation, but now it's in the standard itself. Further, there will be a disclaimer that has to be included with the disclosure of performance information, and that will be in Appendix C so that you can consistently apply, again, emphasis on consistency and clarity in disclosure to avoid misrepresentation. Similarly, with the placement definition, this has been along for a long time. That's one of the hallmark of ACICS in terms of its focus on career outcomes. There is a definition for the placement rate, and we have our guidelines for the CAR. What was missing and has been added is a succinct definition of placement itself, and that would be in the glossary. And just so we're all on the same page, this does not contradict the current expectation of the 3 criteria that need to be met, one of which has to be met for the classification of placement, which is by job title, skills, or attestation. This definition is seeking only to summarize that expectation. And any additional guidance will be included in the CAR guidelines, which is on our website. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ian again.
Thank you, Per-Leader. I will discuss now the department policy, which we hope we won't have to use for anybody on this call, but for purposes of letting you all know, we are making some proposed revisions to the department policy, specifically the procedure for how an individual or entity would appeal that decision. So the clarification will be that if the council does have to issue an intent to debar or an intent to bar an individual or entity, that individual or entity would have one opportunity to appeal this decision, which would go before the council. It could occur either in writing or in person. And once the council has heard the individual or entity's appeal, for why they should not be debarred or the debarment should be minimized in length, then they would make a final decision. And of course, the standard will remain that if the individual does not appeal the decision, then it would automatically go to a final decision. And with that, I will turn it right back over to Per Leader to discuss admission requirements for professional master's degrees.
So currently, the standard requires that if a graduate degree does not have as a bachelor's degree as a means for admission, that this bachelor's degree has to be pursued in conjunction with the master's degree. Based on feedback from the field and research of best practices and across other agencies and the professions, we have concluded that that may not be reasonable or a practical application, and that it's not necessary in some fields. It's not necessary to have a bachelor's degree for pursuit of that profession. So the criteria was enhanced to clarify that expectation, that if it's not required, a bachelor's degree is not required in that particular profession, then, and if it's recognized by a specialized agency, then that will no longer be necessary to have the bachelor's degree be part of that program. Thank you, everyone.
So before we move into topic 2, which will be for information only, so these will not be proposed revisions to the criteria, but will of course be important items of discussion either in our bylaws or procedural changes or information we'd like from outreach to ACICS institutions. I want to go back and just repeat that for topic 1, for the proposed criteria revisions, we do ask that you provide comments to the field. We are certainly looking to hear feedback, and we'll of course get into that in the questions and comments that you have. But we would like to receive comments, and we have a survey which we'll get to at the end for allowing you to provide those comments. But again, note that we are making these enhancements and feel they're important to get out into the field relatively soon. So there is a limited time for comments, which will occur only until May 6th, which is when we'll close the comment from the field. And note that all these proposed revisions, the plan is to make them effective if they go through on July 1st, 2016. So it is we understand it's a quick process, and that's why we encourage you to ask any questions about these, but we think they're extremely significant and important to discuss. So with that, we'll get into the information only, which, as I said, will be discussion about a new Board of Ethics, which is included within the ACICS bylaws. Then we'll get into some procedural enhancements of interim on-site evaluations, and then we'll have an outreach to ACICS institutions in recognition or in relation to our re-recognition application. And with that, I'll throw it over to Tony again to discuss the new Board of Ethics.
Thank you, Ian. So it will not surprise any of you that have been paying attention to the criticism and scrutiny, justified or unjustified, of accreditation in general and ACICS in particular, that there are issues about the degree to which we protect through the commission selection process and vetting process and participation process integrity and absence of conflicts of interest. As a personal observer and colleague of many of these individuals, those criticisms seem not only unfounded but also terribly misinformed. But regardless, the Council is very diligent about paying attention to anything that has the potential to erode the confidence in the integrity of their decision-making process, their independence, and their ethical standards. So they on their own decided, and this is something that's been brewing for a little while, to look into the bylaws that apply to the composition of the board and the council and make a few changes. Number one, they established in the bylaws a new board that will be, whose primary purpose will be to reconcile either perceived or actual conflicts of interest or breaches of integrity by members of the council who also sit as members of the board of directors. That board will be comprised of 3 individuals, 2 of which will be drawn from the public, and they will have the authority by the council and the board if there is a conflict or inability to resolve whether or not a circumstance of an individual commissioner rises to the level of a conflict that could undermine the integrity of the board or the board decisions, whether that person should be asked to resign or otherwise be removed from their assignment. So that will become another independent and effective and potent way to resolve any of these circumstances that arise for reasons that nobody can really control. Secondly, the Board of Ethics will be a standing committee of the Board of Directors and has that authority to act. Thirdly, there is a bylaw change that adds an additional circumstance by which a commissioner will be asked to resign if, in fact, they're employed by an institution that has deemed to be under serious scrutiny because of compliance or non-compliance with ACICS standards. So those are enhancements to the bylaws, to the self-governance integrity of 15 very diligent and hardworking individuals, current commission, prior commissions, that they voluntarily have said we will add to make sure that any perception is addressed directly and effectively. Then I'd like to turn it over to Ian to talk about interim on-site evaluations.
Thank you, Tony. So this is all just procedural changes for and enhancements for the field to know. We, as you know, have always had the ability to conduct special visits when the council or ACICS deems it's necessary, and of course have the opportunity to do announced or unannounced visits for those. But the real change or enhancement to this is that ACICS will now, anytime we're on site, do a substantive review of the institution and its overall effectiveness in specific areas and overall, specifically in the areas of administrative capability, effectiveness planning, admission and recruitment practices, record keeping both with student and faculty records, as well as of course, the campus accountability report that's submitted annually to ACICS, and faculty qualifications, along with some other effectiveness areas that may be necessary dependent on the institution and the issue. And how that will occur procedurally is we will incorporate these special visits and more substantive visits into the already established quality assurance monitoring program. So as you know, if changes are made to a campus or institution, ACICS conducts a visit to that campus. And with that, we've been focused on really that change to the institution, as well as how that change, changes any of the other things happening at the institution. So with this procedural enhancement, we will now, in every case, look at the overall effectiveness of the institution, not specifically at a program or how that program has altered the institution, but the institution as a whole, and then still look at, of course, the program and the changes to that. So that's how this would be included into the already established quality assurance monitoring program, which of course are interim reviews that happen based on substantive changes to the institution. Along with that, we will also apply these special visits and substantive visits to any at-risk institutions determined by ACICS and the Council. And those, of course, could come with with outcomes that ACICS looks at, whether student achievement outcomes or if ACICS receives complaint or adverse information or has a concern about financial conditions and any other extensive or excessive changes to the institution. ACICS will monitor clearly these institutions and may determine to a number of opportunity or a number of different choices, including, of course, ask for a report from the institution or a response, as we have been doing, but also follow that up with a special visit to ensure that the institution is in compliance with ACICS standards, and despite all these different concerns, that they continue to meet the standards. And this process will be introduced in the upcoming spring 2016 cycle. There are institutions and campuses that will receive special visits, so you can be sure that ACICS will be doing those. And in some cases, we've told the institutions that they are coming, and in other cases, we may not have. And I think Tony may want to elaborate as well on some of these enhancements.
Thank you, Ian. So just to reiterate, particularly on the last topic, on-site evaluations, and also to reflect back on the themes we established at the beginning of this presentation, if there seems to be a sense of urgency, if there seems to be a sense of intensity in the changes we're making and the breadth of those changes, it is not by accident. It's because the council and the board has determined and is determined to turn this corner effectively. So if you picked up on the themes that there will be more evaluations, and that those evaluations will be based on a risk assessment of the institution or the program, you are understanding one of the factors that are going to be involved in a greater degree. If you've picked up on the fact that these reviews may in fact be of a little bit greater frequency, with greater depth and breadth as necessary, that is also a fair assumption based on the emphasis that this council has placed on reviewing quality. And most importantly is to reflect that what this will produce, and it's really important to reflect that all of these enhancements are going on in real time. There is the short intervals and the immediacy is manifest in the current evaluation cycle, so that when council meets next as a full decision-making body in August, the level of information that they have available, the quality of that information, and in some cases even the quantitative nature of the information they have in front of them in order to make more effective decisions, will be substantially different than what they've had in the past. Anything less than that would not be worthy of ACICS or our member institutions. Secondly, I'd like to go to the next slide now, talking about re-recognition. I know that's on everybody's mind, and I won't spend a lot of time on the particulars, but I will tell you this, that what has changed in our plan of attack, our plan of demonstration of eligibility and worthiness to be re-recognized by the U.S. Department of Education, is that in the last couple of weeks, there has been a manifestation of a great deal of activism by folks who have decided that they object to the re-recognition of ACICS. That requires us then to say, if we have relationships with students or graduates or employers or other third parties in the community, in your communities, who in fact believe from the heart that the value of the education they received or the value of the training of the employees that they're hiring is a fair reflection of the good job that ACICS does, now is the time for those voices to be heard. And those voices can be heard in one of two ways. One would be through letters to the Secretary of Education with copies going to ACICS, putting in their own words how they personally have experienced the quality and the effectiveness of the institutions accredited by ACICS. The other will be that there will be an opportunity for some folks, not a great deal of folks, but some folks to appear in person on April 22nd during the NACICI hearing here in Washington, D.C., and give their own personal 3-minute account of why they believe re-recognition is appropriate for ACICS. You will be receiving in very short order the details of how this outreach process is going to work, including some fulfillment mechanisms and specific messages to convey if there is an interest in a student, a graduate, or an employer, or other community member. Certainly if you all have, as I know you do, advisory committees for your different program levels who on their own are willing to stand up for the quality and integrity of what they encounter in dealing with ACICS institutions, now is the time to ask them politely to consider weighing in. The details of when and how, again, will be coming to you directly from correspondence that I have written and have sent to you all. And we ask you to consider that because in addition to the merits of our case for re-recognition, we now also need for there to be some public pronouncements. And we would expect those to be respectful and thoughtful and definitely sincere. But now is the time for those to come forward. And with that, I'll turn it back to Ian and we can get into Q&A. Thank you all.
Thank you, Tony, for that presentation and for that information. We are now in the question and answer section. So please provide your questions. We already have some questions, and if anything in the presentation wasn't clear, feel free to ask us, and we'll do our best to answer as many questions as possible. The first we'll be getting, there seems to be a number of questions about the Board of Ethics. So I'll let Tony, but I'll read these questions out and then let Tony answer those questions. The first is what is deemed serious. So in the Board of Ethics, there's a statement that it would be serious concerns with criteria, as well as is that tied with Department of Education concerns. Along with that, there's another question about if the commissioner has issues with other agencies, whether it be another accrediting agency or a programmatic agency or a state or other oversight agencies. Would that play an effect into whether that commissioner would be part of or would be required basically to resign? And along with that, one more question would be, have you considered a mechanism to appoint alternative Board of Ethics members in the event that one of the Board of Ethics members is a commissioner that would be under conflict? So I'll throw those few questions over to Tony, and he can further clarify this expectation.
Yes. Let me answer the first part of that question, the last part of that question first, or is it the first part of the question last? I don't remember. But so in terms of the composition of the Board of Ethics, I mentioned briefly that would be 2 public members and 1 from a member institution. Whether that individual is currently a commissioner or not, or whether he or she is a former commissioner from a member institution, is a detail that has not been worked out. So the question is worthwhile, and I believe the governance structure of ACICS, that being the Board of Directors, will take that into consideration as they flesh out how to implement and operationalize the Board of Ethics. Regarding the other parts of the question, I will defer to the board members within their own deliberations to define more clearly for their own purposes of being effective members of the governance team when a threshold is crossed and how to define things such as the terms that were mentioned in the question. Other than that, we don't have a lot of answers, and I'm not sure when those answers are more clearly defined that they will necessarily or should be shared widely. That is a matter for the governance body of the organization to control and monitor their own participation in the composition of their decision making. It is subject to transparency in terms of the the standards and the bylaws. But at the next level of detail, I leave it to that very capable group to create those definitions and decide when is an appropriate way and manner and time frame to apply them.
Thank you, Tony. There seem to be some questions about the definition of placement, and I'll throw that over to Perlita in a second, but let me just read off that an individual is asking, am I correct in my understanding that the revised definition of placement is only to provide additional clarification and that campuses must still document placement by either job title, skills, or attestation?
And that is correct. And I would like to take this opportunity to correct myself. It's title, skills, and by benefit, which is documented through attestation and other evidence of that benefit. So you are correct in that summary.
There's also some questions about student achievement disclosures. One is, does the institution get to determine where it wants to provide the information on its student achievement disclosures? Basically, what does it consider public? A similar question to that is, would it be required to be on the institution's website, or could a handout be appropriate? I will throw that to Perlita to answer those questions as well about student achievement.
Thank you, Ian. And if you look at the criterion 3-1-704, it just says that you have to make public that disclosure. We do not say where. One of the best practices as published by Tony earlier this year was best practices on how to disclose that information, make it readily available on your website. However, the criterion just says it has to be public. And by public, we mean any entity, any third party who wishes to have access to that information. A potential student, any stakeholder and interested individuals who come into your campus who would like to access that information should be able to have access to it. We have seen schools who have a handout that they give to every potential applicant during the admissions process so that they're clearly aware of what the outcomes, the performance outcomes are.
Thank you, Perlita. I see some questions about interim on-site evaluations, and I'll try my best to handle those. One was for interim on-site evaluation. It was mentioned that some schools were not told that these were coming. Does that mean there will be unannounced visits conducted, and if so, on what basis? And a somewhat similar question about on-site evaluations is, will there be updated report templates and visit preparation documents? It is correct that the council may, and if you were with us in October and January, there's a new criteria going into effect also in July 1st about that the council can conduct an unannounced visit at any given time. Those, of course, would be determined by ACICS and by the council when it would be appropriate and necessary to do an unannounced rather than do an announced visit. Of course, we understand the challenges with each. But in some instances, it may be more appropriate to do an unannounced visit rather than announce. But ACICS, we're aware of that and want to give the institution an opportunity to collect all the documents necessary and provide the information when that's necessary. And along with that, though, we will be providing guidance and report templates and visit preparation materials for these special visits and interim on-site evaluations. We are in the process of creating special visit templates that will be, available for institutions to see. Of course, those may be modified based on what the information we receive is. If it's a complaint or an adverse information, of course, we may look at specific things based on that. So it really be determined on what the issue is, but we will have a standard special visit template that will be available for institutions to see. With that, I'll look at another I see is for the documented admission recruitment process. Other than training, what are we looking for? We're really looking for, and we'll give more information once the survey's been conducted and best practices guidance will be given, but we're looking for oversight measures of admissions and recruiting practices. We conducted a small survey prior to doing this, and noticed that a lot of institutions are already doing these oversight measures with admissions and recruiting. They have a number of different avenues to ensure that admission reps and recruiting personnel are giving accurate information. That includes the trainings, the constant communication, the meetings, as well as other avenues like listening in on phone calls for the admissions director, or some institutions do their own secret shops of calls. So we'll be looking for what the institution does to ensure that they have a process and that they've documented this process for admissions and recruitment. Let me look and see some others. I'm trying to read through. We've gotten some answers on performance disclosure, so I think that per leader clarified those. Another one about that is one asked, I'd like to clarify that all placement, retention, and pass rates must be per campus. Is ACICS expecting to find this information in the gainful employment forms, or can we use separate disclosure document? And I'll hand that over to per leader, who will answer that one as well.
That's a very good question, Jane. The gainful employment form may not necessarily be appropriate for those disclosures because, as you're aware, if you have a certain number of graduates or students, the form does not allow you to report that performance information. I believe it's 10 or less because of privacy concerns. However, ACICS does not limit the disclosure based on number of graduates or enrollment. So it may be necessary to have your own performance disclosure document, web page by campus, and that is critical, by campus, to reflect the rates as reported, so that as with that disclosure that we're adding to Appendix C as well, be mindful of that, but the gainful employment form may not be appropriate in all instances. That's a really good question. Thank you.
So just to handle some other clarifying questions about evaluation meeting room material documents, and because of these changes, remember that these changes will go into effect July 1st, 2016, if of course the field, based on the field's comments, and there may be some modifications to that based on what we heard in this AWARE webinar and in others. But note that it will be July 1st when it goes into effect. So these that are specific to on-site evaluations, some of them, of course, are not probation standards and debarment policies. Those aren't specifically involved with on-site as much. But those changes will go July 1st, which would mean that they'd be in effect for any visit following that. There is a question, or was a question, about the data integrity standard and what the new individual will be doing while on site. So I'll throw that over to per leader, who can answer that question about data integrity.
Thank you for that question. Those of you who have visits coming up this spring and have already received your visit memo, you may notice the addition of a data integrity reviewer role specified on that visit memo. So we're deliberate in the implementation of this level of review, additional level of review, that we're enhancing the on-site evaluation process, so that it's not necessarily an additional cost to the institution or the campus. So in the instance, we're looking at the number of graduates, the number of placements reported, those not available for placement as reported on the CAR, to determine if we need a separate individual whose only function is to do the data integrity review, or if that role can be coupled with someone who's already on the team to be efficient yet thorough. And the expectation for that role will be to conduct as much as is possible, up to 100% of all graduates reported as placed using the 3 criteria, as well as all graduates reported as not available for placement. And we're hoping to be able to verify, like I said, almost consistently up to 100% of that reported data. So that is the expectation. So it may not be a unique individual, but could be based on the size of your campus, the number of graduates reported, etc.
Thank you, per leader. I'll read off a question that may be on some people's minds, and I'll let Tony, the executive in charge, handle that, which is, it appears that there's a chance that the Department of Education will not renew. Has there been discussion on what will take place for ACICS schools? Is there a teach-out requirement, or what would the process be? And I'll let Tony handle that question.
Thank you, Ian, and thank you for posing that question. It is, I'm sure, on the minds of a lot of school owners and school operators and CEOs of our institutions. And I think it's suffice to say, number one, that a review of the facts helps inform these considerations. And I believe a review of those facts indicate that this is not a time to panic or make precipitous decisions, but to think very carefully what are the risk factors and what is the magnitude of the risk factors and the timing in which they might manifest. So the first fact would be that in some of the very recent high-profile advocacy that is pushing back on ACICS's recognition, there was a call for the Department of Education to revoke, to take immediate action to remove our recognition. That has produced no indication by the department that they intend to do that. I think that within the normal recognition cycle, the department recognizes it has every opportunity between now and the end of our current grant of recognition, which expires the end of this year, to look deeply and broadly into our effectiveness and make an informed decision about whether or not we're performing with sufficient effectiveness to meet or exceed all of their standards. I believe that discussion will be played out between now and May 15th, when we submit additional evidence based on a supplemental request for information that's part of our recognition process. It will be also the topic of some very direct questions and interchange with the National Advisory Committee on April 22nd here in Washington, D.C. At that point, within 2 to 3 weeks, maybe no more than a month, so think early to mid-July, the department will issue a letter to ACICS indicating the degree to which the senior department official agrees or conflicts with the recommendation from NACICS. Not even knowing what the recommendation from NACICS or the advisory committee is going to be, it's also way too early to speculate on what that letter from the senior department official might look like. And it's also likely, because of some of the quirks and new wrinkles in the recognition process this time, that notwithstanding all of that, we will, ACICS, be going back to the advisory committee in December for their biannual meeting to present additional evidence and answer additional questions that will also be material to whether or not we are granted re-recognition or re-recognition with a compliance report required, or re-recognition with a compliance report and other restrictions. Those are all possible scenarios. But to this specific question, in the event, I would hope that it's an unlikely event. I am here to make sure it does not happen. But in the event that the department decides to allow the current grant of recognition to expire, I believe the department's normal operating procedure would be to give all ACICS colleges and schools in good standing up to 18 months to find other sources of accreditation. I believe that is very much an extreme worst-case scenario. I believe all the changes that you've heard about today, that you'll be hearing about if you're going to encounter a site visit team by ACICS in the next 3 months, everything you will see on our website in other published information, and everything that you will hear at the annual meeting in May indicates the degree to which we are, the length of measures we're going to make sure that does not happen. But in the event that it does, that would be the most likely way to mitigate any detrimental impact on the schools.
Thank you, Tony, for that. We you guys keep firing these questions, so we'll try and answer them as best we can. We have a lot surrounding our performance disclosures, the data integrity, the placement, which are all kind of linked together. I'm going to read some of them off and try and throw it to Leader to see if we can kind of take care of all these questions. I know we can't do everything. They're complicated issues, but we'll do the best we can to answer these. The first is for disclosures. They're currently required to provide performance fact sheets with completion, placement, and licensure rates, as well as gainful employment templates that include the above, as well as salary information. Can you clarify what additional disclosures are needed, or what we have will currently suffice? I'll let Pralita handle that one up front, and then we'll go into more questions about placement and data integrity.
Thank you, Ian. There are quite a few of these questions about the data integrity and placement. I'm beginning to feel like we need a separate webinar to get into more detail and to provide more one-on-one guidance and best practices and some direct feedback from the ACICS team. Tony is saying yes, hands up, thumbs up, so I'm thinking this might be coming up in the next couple of weeks. So please look out for an email inviting you to attend a separate session on these topics. But concerning the disclosure, I'm trying to summarize the expectation of the team. If licensure, is that the one? If licensure is not required and the students choose to do the licensure exam, that's one of the questions I saw. That's not what Ian read off the slide, but it's one of the questions I saw, and while it's fresh in my mind, let me address it right now. If licensure is not required, but students choose to take the test, should that be disclosed? So let's think about it this way. Would that be an accurate reflection of performance if 100 students graduated, 20 chose to take the test, and all 20 passed? Would that be 100% licensure pass rate? Or would that be 20 of the 100 who graduated from that course? So the focus here needs to be on the accuracy of the information so that there's no misrepresentation of performance, and that is critical. So think about it this way. Further, in the enhancement to the criterion, we said licensure, retention, licensure if appropriate or required, retention and placement must be at a minimum disclosed. There was a question about additional disclosures. The criterion says information about performance. So if the additional areas or components or measurements of performance that the institution deem or campus deems appropriate to disclose, they should also disclose that. But focus on the accuracy and the reliability of the information disclosed, because ACICS will verify that information during the on-site evaluation process. And this is a good segue into that data integrity individual that will be on the teams or will be serving in that role. So currently we verify placement as much as is possible at the program level. So every specialist review placement and those graduates classified as not available for placement in that program. This role will, the individual serving in that role will be doing that verification for all programs. So it's not going to be anything different than what we currently do. The difference, the enhancement will be that the individual will be doing 100% verification as much as is possible. So you won't have the criminal justice person doing verification, the medical assistant person doing verification, and the nurse doing verification. This data integrity reviewer will do the verification for these 3 programs, working closely with the specialist to ensure that the benefit criterion or the skills criterion would be met as classified by that campus. And that's an important note to make. So on a case-by-case, we'll be looking at the evaluators and the ability to serve in that role, and they'll be notified if they will be chosen to serve as a data integrity reviewer. As I mentioned before, based on the size of the campus, because we would like to do 100% verification. I also want to answer another question about the performance disclosure and how that ties to the placement verification on review. Part of the criterion 704 says that it has to be reliable. So if during the verification of placement, during the review process, we are unable to verify the rate that you disclose. So if you disclose an 80% placement rate and the data integrity reviewer could not confirm that, that will be an issue. That will be a finding because we have a question about the reliability of the disclosure that you're making on placement in that particular example. Am I good, Ian? Thank you.
I'll go into, there's one question about probation wording in the memo, and asks about clarifying the time frame by which an institution may remain on probation. Basically, probation will now be included within our other typical out-of-compliance standards. We have a requirement of what time frame may not exceed, which is department guidance for how long an institution, may be on compliance before an adverse action needs to be taken. But basically, the new clarification is that probation will not be open-ended. It will either need to be determined by the council, either with a withdrawal action or be lifted. It will not be an open-ended. It will be included within the other out-of-compliance actions that have taken place, like compliance warning and show cause. Let me look here and see any other questions. There's some more about placement, so let me go down. I'll try and hit some of these placement questions. One is, how does an institution account for jobs that students hold before, during, after graduation? There's a question similarly about placed by skills, job title, or benefit. Must you first pass the NCLEX or RN and PN to be considered placed? I'll take that one. If that's a requirement for the job, then that would be the requirement. Yeah, if you can't get a nursing job without an NCLEX, which in most cases you cannot, then you'd be required to pass that test before graduation. Regarding placement, there's a question about working in the field of study or requiring a credential that directly benefits the graduate's existing employment. That's our new definition. Do schools decide what directly benefit means? Can that be employment out of field as long as it directly benefits, or does it still have to be in field or related field of study? Would direct benefit include professional development required by employer to maintain employment position or advancement position? I'll throw this over to per leader, who will answer specifically what that's regarding.
I'm going to stick to a simple response. Yes. You're correct. It would be for professional development as required by employer. That would include the benefit. And just for clarity, and so everyone, we're all on the same page, the definition is only to summarize the current interpretation of the 3 criteria. And the burden of proof is always on the campus to have the appropriate documentation to support whichever one of the 3 criteria that they have used for classification: title, skills, or the benefit.
Thank you, per leader. We'll go to another question back to about the Board of Ethics. There's a specific question about if there's a definition of sustained and serious scrutiny regarding commissioner resigning if the institution is not compliant. I'll throw that over to Tony to answer that question.
Thank you, Ian. So we don't know what we don't know. I think that was probably a former Secretary of Defense. What we do know is that that definition, with that degree of precision, has yet to be developed. If y'all have some suggestions about how that definition or how that standard for performance by a member of the council should be defined more tightly, I believe that that is worthy of discussion and worthy of contribution to the council, and they will take it into consideration in further implementing and operationalizing those expectations. But what we do know now is that that definition is being considered and is being made more definitive, and it is worthy of some additional feedback and input from a variety of stakeholders. So we invite that perspective.
Thank you, Tony. I'll quickly answer a question just about this webinar. There's been a number of questions about whether you'll have access to this webinar and the recording. You will. It will be placed on our website once we package it and have it. And so, yes, you can reflect back on the slides and the recording of the webinar. So just note that. There's a question where I may have misspoke asking about taking a nursing licensure exam prior to graduation. If I said that, that wasn't my what I meant to say. Of course, you take the licensure exam after graduation, but in most circumstances, it's my understanding that you have to have that license prior to working in the field of nursing. Most of course, the outcomes for nursing programs are to become a nurse. If the institution has or wants to make an argument that doing another job would have the skills of a nurse, it may be possible, but I'd certainly take a look at what the outcomes of a nursing program are, which in most cases are to become a nurse, not another profession like a medical assistant or something to that effect. So hopefully that clarifies that issue. There's still a number of questions coming in. I'll try and sort them through. You guys don't stop, it sounds like. So we have another question about placement. So can you elaborate, and data integrity, in fact, can you elaborate on how the data integrity person would determine if a graduate is unavailable for placement? Would this be based on documentation collected? Also for employment records, what would the data integrity role be reaching out to grads or employers? So I will give that over to per leader to answer that question about data integrity and placement.
I think we opened a can of worms, guys. But these are good questions, and like I said, I promise we should probably do something additional to provide more insight. So this is not, as I mentioned, this is consistent with what we've been doing on the review process. We have been verifying those graduates that have been classified as not available due to health, military, continuing education. We've already been doing that, and that practice is going to be the same. We look at documentation to support those graduates you've said continuing education. We look for unofficial transcripts, acceptance letters, current class schedules for the place where they're continuing their education. So the documentation will be consistent with what we've been asking for not available for placement. The data, similarly, we'll be calling the graduate and then the employer, and hopefully we can get one of those two individuals to confirm and verify placement. If there continues to be an issue or concern about the integrity of that data, that could result in additional action by ACICS, as Tony mentioned earlier. There's another question. I might as well just take it. Have Ian tell me to take it. Can you review what is the appropriate documentation for each criteria for the placement by job title, skills, and benefit? So for job title, again, the campuses are required to have the backup or the supporting documentation in the team room during evaluation visit for the CAR. So if, using the nursing example, if you have a student, a graduate from the nursing program who got placed as a nurse, you'd have the individual's name, the program that they graduated from, when they graduated, the title that they hold, the employer's name and contact information, as well as that graduate's contact information. The data integrity reviewer will look at that information and say, oh, Jane Smith was placed using the job title. We'll call Jane Smith to verify with her, did you get placed as a nurse with the hospital, the Bethany Hospital? Yes or no? And that's how we would do that for by title. By skills, it's the institution's responsibility to have sufficient documentation to prove that the skills role, a predominant use of skills for that program of study. One we see very often is CNA with nursing, or the security guard of criminal justice. The institute, remember, the campus is the burden of proof is on the campus to justify why that is an appropriate placement for someone from that program by use of skills, the predominant, a majority in the use of skills. And same for benefit we talked about earlier. There has to be some additional documentation, not just an attestation, but something to prove that this program benefited that individual for professional development, to maintain employment, for promotion, etc. Oh my. Ian has this one.
I'll throw it to Tony, but we have a question clarifying a comment Tony made in response to the re-recognition, so I'll let him answer. Is the 18 months that Tony mentioned earlier a department protocol or a suggestion? So Tony will handle that question.
Thank you, Ian. This question indicates to me that people were paying attention to my earlier remarks, and that's a good sign. The bad news is that this is not a suggestion on my part, nor is it necessarily a written protocol. It is only my observation of the interval that I've seen the department afford other institutions when their source of accreditation was being eroded in some way by an official action. My point is that the Department of Education understands that at the end of the day, even an adverse action against an accreditor ultimately displaces and inconveniences substantial numbers of students. And if it's going to take that action, it's got to take into consideration at a very high level the well-being of those students first. I believe that ethic and those principles will be applied regardless of the outcome of our re-recognition effort. But I do not speak for the department. I'm only telling you what I have observed.
Thank you, Tony. We'll go back. Placement seems to be a theme here as well, so we'll try and answer that as well. If an institution is using a third-party verification for placement, will this be used by the visiting team member? I'll take that one, which is basically ACICS will conduct its own review, and will do, as per leader said, up to 100% verification. That should be from information that the institution provides. In some issues, we may take third-party documentation if ACICS is unable to contact either the employer or graduate. We may, if you have documentation, it wouldn't necessarily be from a third party. It would be better from the employer that we may accept that as documentation if there's a signed employment verification or something to that effect. But in any case, ACICS will be doing its own verification. It will not rely just on third party. With this new data integrity specialist, we'll be doing our own review. Another question similar to that regarding benefit of training: is attestation enough for verification signed by graduate or employer? We are not looking for just an attestation saying that it's by benefit. There needs to be some documentation of why this directly benefits the student, whether it's promotion, so they needed to get this credential, say associate's or a bachelor's degree, in order to get promoted, or there's some direct benefit in the job description or otherwise stating that this job, it will benefit the student. So it's not just a student saying this has benefited me. We need some documentation. And again, it's to note with the placement definition to clarify that this is for existing employment of students. So if a student's employed in a current job that they've been employed in prior to graduation, and then they need, and then they, have taken this course or this program in order to benefit either by promotion or for professional development, that's what we're looking for. It's not a way to get out of basically by title or skills. The predominant way is that a student either, a nursing student, as Perlita said, is a nurse, or they have the predominant skills in that program. By benefit should strictly be for only existing employment. And as per leader said, it may be important for us to do a webinar or more guidance based on this, so it's clear in all this regard what we're looking for. Another question regarding the placement calculation, are completers still included in that? Yes, there's been no change to that. We haven't changed the placement calculation at all. This is, again, just a clarification of the placement rate, and the definition's just a succinct, understanding operational definition of that. Some more placement questions. What happens when the graduate gets placed and then resigns or gets fired and we find out after the fact? Will this affect our percentage when it was already informed in the CAR? I will let Perleader talk now. I've been talking a while, so Perleader will handle this question.
Thanks, Ian. And I guess it depends on the time of reporting to that question about resignation. So at the time of preparing the CAR for submission, November 1, at that time when you're looking at your numbers and reporting placement, was that graduate placed appropriately? Was that graduate placed? So when you report that number in November, was that person placed? If at the time of verification, which may happen 6 months later, they say, well, I used to work there, but I'm no longer working there, or I was placed. So we're confirming the information that you reported in November 1. In terms of, remember, we're looking at a continuity of employment that has to be sustaining employment. We recognize that the institution has no control over a student getting fired or a graduate getting fired. So, but it's at the time of reporting was that student placed. And they keep on coming. But placement.
I'll switch gears from placement for a second. We've been talking about that for a while. There's a question about the documented process for admissions. So if the information were contained in the enrollment agreement, would that suffice, or should the information be sent in an email to the prospective student? I'll answer the first part of the question, which is we're looking for more than just information in an enrollment agreement. We're looking for a process that the institution has that documents that they have oversight of admissions personnel and recruiting. So that's continuous training or meetings or reviews or oversight of these personnel, not just that the student signed off on the enrollment agreement. So it's more about overseeing the institution's own admission personnel. Of course, we always assume and require that the institution's providing accurate information, and that in the documents and in the templates that's important, that in the guidance documents and the orientation and all that it's clear that it's accurate. But on top of that, we're requiring a documented process for overseeing admission and recruiting practices to ensure that those individuals and personnel are providing accurate and current information, so that they know what the information is, that the institution has a way to ensure that the personnel are giving that information that's accurate. So I hope that clarifies a bit, and we'll certainly give more guidance in the best practice guidance document. So we have a question I'll take real quick just to reiterate is, so will 100% placement verification be done on an on-site visit when ACICS renews accreditation at each campus? That is the goal. We understand that some campuses have large amounts of students, and it might not be possible to do that on the 2 to 3 days that we're on site. But for most institutions with this primary role of the data integrity reviewer, that is the goal, to do 100%, and as much as possible, that is what we will do.
Hi. So in the interest of time, because we only have a few minutes left, and we really don't want to cut you off on all your great questions about placement and the data integrity reviewer, which we recognize is you have to accept that additional level of review possibly, and wrap your mind around the expectations of the review team and ACICS overall. So we just checked our calendars, and we will be scheduling after this a webinar on a webinar on placement and the data integrity reviewer processes so that we can answer all your questions and field additional questions that you may have. So it'll be more of a Q&A. There won't be a presentation. It'll be more of a Q&A. So we're going to save the questions that we have not gotten to and then send you an invitation and solicit additional questions so that we can spend more focused attention just on placement and the data integrity expectations of ACICS. We're currently looking at April 27th, that's next week, Wednesday, from 2 to 3:30. And as I said, we'll send you an invitation shortly so you can plan accordingly. Thank you.
So with that said, I will hold the questions off that are related to placement and disclosure and data integrity to that call. They're still coming in, so you guys are really interested in this, and of course should be. These are important enhancements to our process. There was one question I saw about when the templates would be available for special visits. We're working on those as we speak, so they'll be available once completed. They'll certainly be in the next few weeks that we'll get more procedural guidance out to institutions about this. I'll search to see if we have any that are outside. Some people are questioning the dates, but we'll let you know when that date is. I see a bunch about placement, disclosure, placement, the definition. Sorry for reading in front of everybody. Yeah, so we have one question about re-recognition, about the schedule. Tony can clarify again, since that, of course, is on the front of everybody's mind. He'll clarify the re-recognition schedule, so I'll throw it over to Tony for that.
Thank you, Ian, and per leader. So just to reiterate, ACICS submitted a substantial amount of narrative and exhibits back in the first week of January to fulfill its primary responsibility in seeking re-recognition by the Department of Education. And re-recognition for all accreditors, regardless if they're regional or national, programmatic, specialized, or anything in between, occurs every 5 years. In other words, the department does not extend recognition beyond 5 years. So our last grant of recognition was, in fact, 2011, 2012, and the outcome of that was the compliance, the submission of a compliance report, which then produced a grant that of 5 years, because the first 2 years we burned through going through the re-recognition and the compliance report process that ended in 2016. So our grant of recognition is in place through December 31st of this year. The first step was to submit the application and the evidence first week in January. We subsequently have received supplemental requests, which are totally unusual but are appropriate given the circumstances, part of which we fulfilled on April 1st, and the second part of which we will fulfill on May 15th. In the meantime, sometime between now and June 22nd, which is our scheduled date for appearance in front of the National Advisory Committee, we will receive a draft report from the Department of Education indicating their findings relative to our compliance, ACICS compliance with recognition standards. At that point, we will be given some period of time to respond to those findings and remedy any of those findings if, in fact, we've got evidence or narrative that substantially addresses those deficiencies. Then the third step, the next step, will be that the specialist from the department will finalize his or her findings and send that to the advisory committee as a recommendation, which will then be the basis for our face-to-face encounter with the advisory committee on June 22nd. Within a month, typically, after that meeting, the department will take the recommendation from the advisory committee into consideration and arrive at a final decision about whether or not we should be re-recognized for what length of time and any conditions attached to that. So that is the next milestone to look at beyond the advisory committee is early to mid-July, the letter coming out from the department. Until we have that, everything else is really a process. I hope that helps. I don't have a more definitive answer than that.
So I'll take one question about recruitment, and then I think we're right up against 3:30. So we'll have that placement/data integrity with performance disclosure, the webinar to focus specifically on that. I'd also encourage, you obviously have a lot of questions and comments, so I definitely encourage, we have a survey out, which is the comment to the field. I definitely encourage you to respond to that, and if possible, give specific modifications that you think may be important to some of these standards. The one question that I'll answer about recruiting is, one asked, would I be correct to assume that independent recruiters that have signed contracts with an institution also need to comply as if they are agents of the institution? Yes, that is definitely correct. Those are recruiting personnel that are supervised by the institution. There definitely needs to be a documented process for ensuring that they are giving current and accurate information. With that said, it looks like there are still a lot of questions. We didn't get to all of them, and our time is up with placement and other questions. But we'll send out information shortly about when that webinar will be. So with that said, you'll be able to view the AWARE webinar, as I said, on ACICS.org under events, workshops, then webinars, and then we'll have a download for this particular AWARE webinar once it's been packaged and put on the website. And finally, and lastly, I will once again encourage you to fill out the electronic survey, which is our new method for getting comments from the field. We definitely encourage you, whether a school, an evaluator, a public individual, an interested party, please feel free to comment on these. We do and we'll take all the comments and have discussion at our council meeting specific to those. So if you can include specific modifications, if you think they may be necessary to these enhancements, please do so. And again, we will certainly take a look at that. And with that said, I will close out the AWARE webinar. Thank you all for participating and for asking great questions, and thank you to Executive in Charge Tony Bita for his presentation and answering questions, as well Pro Leader Walters-Gilliam, and I'll thank myself as well. So with that said, thank you all again, and we'll be sending out more information about this and other webinars.